Huples Cat. This video is on the second chapter of this book. This course is a good course. It's a great course because it's the great courses that make it. And I'm thoroughly enjoying it. Should we get on with it?
I'd like to talk about another framework, this one described by Ronald Perry and Marjorie Greene, which addresses the mental processing we undertake as a disaster occurs. Perry and Greene suggest that this mental processing happens in 3 steps. The first is risk identification, which is acknowledging that a risk of some type exists.
COVID-19 is a great example of this. Some preppers very early on defaulted to, I'll be fine, I'm young, I'm healthy, this is not a risk for me. And of course some denied its existence, which is utterly bizarre. Both of these ignored the data, and some of them continue to ignore the data.
Just because a warning message is given does not mean that members of the public will acknowledge it. It's common for persons to look around, talk to friends and family, consult other sources, and engage in other confirmations before deciding that a threat is real.
Have disaster plans, act, don't chat.
The second step is risk assessment, in which a person might ask, okay, this is real, but will it affect me? Again, there is often an internal thought process that shapes this consideration, as people may think about what information they've been provided, how trustworthy that information is, how that fits their personal context or their location, and what's happened in the past with similar issues.
This can trap you. Instead, act on your plan. Ask yourself immediately and ongoing, how could this get worse? How could this be really worse? Think worst case and try and prepare and mitigate that. Think outside the box. For example, that they gave, the chlorine ended up wrecking electrical wiring. So if you were in that immediate area and you were aware of the effect of chlorine over time, you might want to take some electronic gear with you when you evacuate that you might not necessarily do normally.
The final step is risk reduction, in which persons decide what to do to protect themselves. This too includes several considerations, including an awareness of what alternatives are available and whether they're likely to be effective and doable.
Many preppers plan to bug out if there's a pandemic. Did lots of videos on it. I always planned to keep working in a pandemic because I worked in a hospital as my partner at the time. We've both since happily retired. Interesting, as far as I know, not one single one of those preppers actually acted on their plans and bugged out when COVID-19 broke. None of them, as far as I'm aware. That plan for them was a good one. If the death rate had turned out to be 25-35% and it turned out to be extremely highly infectious, their normalcy bias delay in not enacting their plan, which was to bug out, could have killed them and their families. As it turned out, there was no particular need to bug out, but they sat around ignoring their plans, and then, in the highlighted events, said, I was right not to bug out. If you have a plan, use it.
Sometimes this is all done very quickly, in a matter of seconds, especially for disasters that occur with little or no notice, as was the case in Graniteville.
This is why a written plan is a great idea.
Residents awoke to the sound of a crash and to reverse 911 calls indicating an incident had occurred and that they should shelter in place. It quickly became apparent that the threat was real. Many heard the crash, and with some noting the smell of chlorine firsthand, there was clearly an awareness that the incident had the potential to be dangerous. When the mandatory evacuation was ordered, it was perceived as an effective and important risk reduction, and residents complied with it. It was unlike any other incident that the area had experienced. The information was perceived as credible and was able to be confirmed by multiple sources, including the media, friends and family, reverse 911, and even individual observations. In fact, in addition to the 1-mile radius where an evacuation was ordered, persons further away also evacuated. This is known as a shadow evacuation and suggests that safety concerns were very widely felt.
I'd not heard this term before, but I think it's absolutely awesome. Shadow evacuation. If there's wildfires raging 20 miles from us here, I'm going to shadow evacuate. I'm not going to hang out and wait and see what happens. There are arguments for staying and hosing down the buildings and chopping more firewood to get the fuel out of the area. There are things you could do. I would argue I would be doing that in advance of any decision to make a shadow evacuation. But at the end of the day, my life and Wolfie's life and Kitty's life is more important to me than this structure in a localized event.
Let's compare this to the 2011 tornado in Joplin, Missouri, which resulted in 161 deaths and significant damages to the local community and its infrastructure, a catastrophe. A study of survivors found that 78% received information about the threat of a tornado, but only 17% immediately took protective actions.
You be one of the 17%.
Some persons reported believing that a tornado wouldn't or couldn't hit the city. Others noted that they were unable to visually verify the threat by looking outside. And others felt that there were so many tornado warnings that didn't materialize that this was just another false alarm.
People have obviously used faulty logic on COVID-19 and other disasters. They were clearly not mentally prepared. Some of them who weren't mentally prepared have very slick prepping channels.
With this combination of ideas, there was an incomplete risk identification that a tornado was imminent. And even if the possibility of a tornado was acknowledged, there was an incomplete risk assessment in terms of perceptions of the tornado's ability to impact the safety of residents living there.
In any disaster, the information is a vital thing to get. Real information that's true and as close to time as you can get it, absolutely vital. But failing to act on a plan that you've already initiated beforehand based on what you think might happen, failure to act to gather information, to get confirmation that your plan should be done, that is a delay. That delay could kill.
So often, we make sense of data only to the extent that it fits our experiences and notions about how to do so. But one key first step in preparedness is psychological. It's only when we acknowledge that disasters and catastrophes can fundamentally change our lives and are not just big emergencies, and that we need to be prepared to identify a threat, to know that it can impact us, and that we need to take protective actions, even if it doesn't feel real just yet. It's only when we acknowledge these things that we can do our most meaningful planning. It's not fun to think about, but it is a reality of emergency preparedness.
Oh, I don't know, I find it kind of stimulating to think, what would I do, what would happen to me if China and the United States of America decide to start lobbing large amounts of nuclear weapons at each other. I'd probably die, but I have plans in place for that scenario. And so at a minimum, my plans would allow me to be occupied and distracted up until the moment of my radiation death or incineration, or being stabbed to death by a horde of crazy people from the city.
After acknowledging the possibility of disaster, the second step is to develop a plan. All hazards planning, meaning plans that can apply in a wide variety of circumstances.
This, in my opinion, is the first and fundamental step to prepping, to emergency preparedness. We as human beings tend to focus on one, whatever we're interested in. Like for me, it's human-caused climate change, or nuclear war, or civil disturbance, or nanoparticles in vaccines. Whatever the threat is, we tend to focus and prep for that threat. But we clearly need to have plans for any and all threats, even the ones we consider unlikely. Do you have a mental plan or a written plan? What to do if there's an alien invasion? Is the alien invasion hostile, beneficial, or indifferent to humans? It would alter the reaction, wouldn't it?
That there are so many responses that would actually apply across a variety of different disaster types that it's more efficient to develop an all hazards plan than it is to say we have to write from scratch a fire plan, a storm plan, an earthquake plan, a long-term power outage plan, and so on.
Correct. Basics are basics, and they need to be done for everything: food, fire, water, shelter, etc.
In the Graniteville incident, you would need to have a plan for communicating your status to family and friends, making sure that you have necessities like medication and access to financial information, having a plan for your companion animals, and so on. And you would need those same things in almost any other type of incident.
And this, my friends, is why prepping can be repetitive.
In the last session, we discussed the 4 key questions that can start to shape a plan: how to receive notifications, where you would shelter, what route you would use to evacuate, and how you would maintain communication.
These 4 questions need to have solid, written, simple, straightforward answers to them before you continue as a prepper. And a lot of us have them in our mind, we think, but writing them down really gives you a concentration and an ability to analyze before events, and certainly after and during events, if you have a written plan. When you've answered those questions, Consider the following questions as well, but answer the 4 basic ones first.
Other than family and friend networks, who might you need to contact in a disaster? And do you have their information recorded?
These 4 levels from ready.gov, an American website from the American government. You have to have all 4 answered and written down. And I would argue you then need to give copies to the significant people in your bug out group or your family group or your local group so they know what to do as well, or at least they know what you're planning to do. Of course, you have to have trust and it has to be 100% before you share that type of information with anyone.
Are there others? Where should you plan to meet in the event of a disaster? Consider establishing a designated meeting place that everyone in your household knows and has recorded.
So you write down clear and brief instructions and you don't assume that they have your knowledge or interest. For example, last week I showed this. This is our old disaster plan. One sheet of paper, it's typed, it's pretty specific. It says do this, do that, don't do this. Pretty specific, designed for Kitty, not designed for me. Mine would be a booklet because it's my hobby.
And finally, consider a location outside of town in the event that there's an evacuation ordered when not everyone is at home, or if there is a disaster that prevents someone from getting home. Everyone in the household should know these locations, where they're located, and routes to get to them.
As you probably noticed by now, I recommend very, very early evacuations and use shadow evacuations yourself to boot out of Dodge rather than wait to see if you're in danger. Call sick, keep your kids from going to school. Consider all of those things to do and do this. The events and types that will trigger evacuation and shadow evacuation are rare. This isn't going to happen every week.
How does your plan fit with those of the schools, workplaces, long-term care facilities, or other institutions that you interact with regularly?
I don't have children, thank goodness, but kids are tricky. Consider having them self-evacuate, especially if they're in a school or a church environment. A lot of schools will actually hold the children and shelter them in place. That may be a good thing. It may not be a good thing. Make sure your kids, and it can be very young kids, are aware of the fact that you are going to rescue them and evacuate them from the school in certain circumstances. So do what the teacher says, but check your phone, look out the window at certain times of the day. I want to be able to get my kid out of that school, even if the teachers are hostile and there's police to stop me from doing so. You'd be surprised what authorities do in the early stages of catastrophes. Whatever you do, make sure your children are very much included in the planning and preparation and training for your disaster plans and your Go Kids. It's not just about you. You might die. They need to be able to have some sort of a plan and some sort of a hope if you die very early on in the SHTF event.
What special needs of people you care about need to be accommodated in your household plan? And are they?
This is very personal and specific. Think medications, of course, but also think drug and medication dependencies in yourself and others. Are they able to cope with the cessation of their addictive thing during SHTF? And if not, consider replacing it, or worst case, consider leaving them behind.
Do you have a plan for companion animals?
Yes.
Under federal law, specifically the Pets Evacuation and Transportation Standards Act, also known as the PETS Act, evacuation protocols are required to accommodate the needs of companion animals, so sheltering for animals is now considered as part of emergency planning.
This should always have been the case, but even if it has changed, and it has changed, don't expect them to allow Marmalade, my cat, and Wolfie, my dog, into a shelter with me. They might not. I'm going to assume that they won't. They easily might decline to have Wolfie and Marmalade in the shelter with me and say we're putting them in a separate shelter for hygiene reasons. No. My family stays with me.
But that doesn't negate the need to plan for your pet's care now.
I think most of us are fairly useless pet carriers. They get damaged, we don't use them that much oftentimes. There's doors missing, we hold them on with hair clips. Definitely that's my case. One of the 2 items of new prepping I'm going to get for this area is the collapsible but solid fabric pet carriers for Wolfie and for Marmalade. So at least I can contain them whether it's in a hotel because we've gone to Toronto on a holiday, or it's because I'm evacuating. Put these carriers by your go bags and by the pet's go bags. Remember, you have to carry all this stuff, right? Make sure you practice and you can carry it as far as you might need to in a real disaster. Don't assume you can drive.
How to receive notifications, where you might find shelter, what routes you might use to evacuate, how you can communicate with family and friends, contact information for essential services, locations where you may be able to meet up with family and friends, how to coordinate your plans with those of schools, workplaces, and other facilities, how to meet any special needs of household members, and how to meet the needs of pets.
All of these components need to be in your disaster plan.
It's possible that you may need to leave in a hurry, such as in the Graniteville incident. The best way to be ready to do so is to consider everything that we've already discussed and then to ask yourself, what would I need to take with me during an evacuation?
And then ask how much you can carry for 10 miles over rough country and deep snow. There's needs versus ability in terms of what goes into the go bag. For example, this is a fire kit. Fire kits are useful. Fire kits will allow me to cause fire to happen wherever I want. But for a go bag, basically maybe some matches and some hand sanitizer and accelerant, but Bix. And it would not be in a wooden box, and it would be very, very small and in Ziploc, so it wouldn't get wet in more than one Ziploc. Have you got extra gasoline stored? Do you have functional bicycles? Do those functional bicycles have panniers on them to carry stuff not just on your back, but lower gravity?
You'll hear the terms go kit and go bag used to identify the collection of items that you should take.
These are what preppers call bug out bags. There's lots of names for this. It just means a small bag or a large bag with items that you need if you are cut off from home or trying to get home in an emergency, disaster, catastrophic situation. Most local disasters, all you really need is a credit card, some ID and some cash. Binoculars are a good idea if you can get lightweight ones. These are old-fashioned ones and I really like these just as an object. I have lightweight plasticky type ones, but these are kind of cool.
If you do keep water or medications or food items in a pre-assembled go kit, be sure to rotate new stocks in and out periodically so they don't go bad. Even bottled water will turn after a while.
This is really sound advice, but it also is sound advice for your pantry and any other stocks you have. Most water, if kept out of sunlight, will be fine for about 6 months or even a year if you shake it up to get a bit of air back in it, if it's been treated by a municipality with chlorine in it. If you're using distilled water or unchlorinated water, really consider rotating it much more often than 6 months, as often as you feel like it.
You can also conceptualize a digital go kit that records some of the information that we've discussed, information that will be helpful to have accessible.
I'm old. Water, EMP, lost or stolen. I'm not keeping stuff on digital. My stuff is hard copy. For example, have a decent map of your local area. This map is of Venice. If I'm bugging out into or out of Venice, this would be very useful. This is not my area, but this is somewhere I do like to go camping and canoeing and kayaking. So decent maps like these are specially treated so they are never going to rot and never going to burn very well. But this is of Algonquin, and if I'm travelling through Algonquin, I really kind of want a map like this, whether it's SHTF or not. The other thing I really need is a compass. And it's an old-fashioned one, which I really like, and I've got it because it's an object of beauty. It isn't the type of compass I would use.
So what goes into your go kit aside from information?
That's the question that's launched thousands of prepper videos, but what I would say is whatever happens, if it's SHTF, if it's a disaster or catastrophe in your local area and you're bugging out, it will not be a walk in the park. It will be brutal, it will be frightening, it will be tough, and this is where it gets interesting. No matter what you put in your pack, no matter what preps you've got, whatever action plan you've got, the result is uncertain in a disaster and specifically in a catastrophe. You have to remain flexible.
They are, first, people and pets. Make sure that you include not only the human members of your household, but also your companion animals. Prescriptions and medications that are necessary, but also including any medical equipment, glasses, hearing aids, and similar items. Papers and information, including personal identification such as a driver's license and any other important documentation. Personal needs, which includes food and water, most importantly, as well as a first aid kit, hygiene items, a change of clothes, Perhaps a flashlight or an old-fashioned radio and charged batteries, your electronic devices, and don't forget their chargers, money, credit cards, and debit cards, and also don't forget the supplies for companion animals that we discussed. Priceless items such as family heirlooms, photo albums, and other property that you may want to take with you.
And now you have a 1,000-kilogram go bag. Be rational when putting this in the bag. Think about what you in your area actually are probably most likely to need, and make sure it's a need versus comfort. It's need versus maybe I need it. It's need versus useful. The one thing they haven't mentioned so far in this course is cash. Carry cash in low denominations, and quite a bit of it, several hundreds at least. So you can at least use that in a convenience store to get stuff if the ATMs are down. You can at least use that to pay for a hotel, having shown them your credit card they can't run, but you've got the cash. If it's early on in certain types of catastrophes and disasters, cash is king. With cash you can take a taxi or a train or a plane and move away from the major area of danger. With a credit card, you might not find it works. Never make your plans based on cars. Cars may or may not work, roads may or may not be open. If you can bug out by car, absolutely do so. But don't assume you will be able to do so. Don't assume that you're the smart person who can get out in the middle of a major city when all the roads are jammed. Don't assume that you won't have to abandon the car during the bug out and walk or use bicycles. Have backup plans, backup ideas. Don't go, this fixes the problem, I'm fine. I have a Berkey water filter, I don't need to worry about treating water. Well, I do. I have other plans, not just the Berkey.
Share the concepts from this presentation with others in your household, your family, and your friends, and talk about how you would address some of the questions posed. Preparedness is not static, it is dynamic, and it's only when you engage in conversation, discuss questions, think through possible scenarios, ask the what-if questions, that plans begin to come together.
This is incredibly true, and this is why the whole concept of the burned out prepper is a logical fallacy. If you are burned out, sick of, fed up, bored by prepping, you never were a prepper. You never were into emergency planning. You were focusing on one or maybe two specific issues that you've read about and talked about to death, and now you're bored of it. You can't see any point continuing onwards. If you are an emergency planner prepper, you've always got to think something new, something unexpected could happen that'll upset my plans, and I need to be ready and knowledgeable and aware to deal with that. It's a massive topic, as complicated as the planet we're on and the people that are on it. Prepping never gets old. Certain types of prepping kind of get old if you watch them a lot, but how many fire starting videos can you watch before you get nauseated? That's a very good question. But you'll always find occasionally something new, something useful. Don't shut off information just because you believe you're a complete expert on the topic. There are no experts in prepping. There are no experts in SHTF. There are people that have got great knowledge and great skills. Use them. But they don't know about you, your situation, and what the next disaster is going to be.
And as you hear about disasters in the news, or as your circumstances change, you may identify new needs or new areas to consider in planning. Revisit your plans at least annually to think about how they can be fine-tuned.
Spring and fall, for me, that's when I do open my go bags and change them. I have spring summer ones into the early fall, and then I have late fall, winter, very early spring one. And this is the winter one, and you can see it, it's pretty heavy, it's pretty decent. I'm going to use it for camping, it's not just to evacuate. But you need to have certain things in a go bag that you can get and put in the go bag that won't necessarily go with me on a camping trip. Things like my passport, things like a lot of photo ID, and various other pieces that I need if I am going to use that and evacuate this area. You will need different things. One size does not fit all. And there you have it. I hope we've navigated through chapter 2 successfully, and I hope when I actually find my internet's functional and I upload it, I hope that it doesn't get hit by copyright.
In our next session, we'll talk about the full preparedness cycle and where to go next with your planning process. Until next time, be safe.
So wherever you are and whoever you are, have a great day and a great week. Don't be frightened of prepping, don't be frightened of emergency preparedness, but do have a solid look. What are you going to do if the power goes out at midnight tonight and doesn't come on for 24 hours? Or a week? Or a month? Or a year? Or 2 years? What are you going to do if the power outage is the entire state? What are you going to do if the power outage is entire America? What are you going to do if the power outage is the entire hemisphere? What are you going to do if all the area around you becomes a flood or a fire? What are you going to do if there's an asteroid strike in South America and it's really cold for the next 2 to 3 years and there's no real power and there's not much food coming into the house? Don't just think about having fire extinguishers and smoke detectors on every level of your building. That's critical. Don't just have an escape ladder like I have to get out of here. Technically I can just go across a roof there and drop down, but the ladder is going to make it much less likely that I will fall and hurt myself. I have the ladder. It's handy. I have the fire extinguishers. They're ready. I know how to use them. Local preparation should be able to help you in a disaster and should be able to help you in a catastrophe. You should never look at prepping in terms of what do I need to put in a bag to live unassisted in the wilderness for the next month, because you won't ever fill the bag. Think about what you need. If you need anything at all, put stuff in it, take stuff out. Look at it once or twice a year, preferably twice a year. Put stuff in, put stuff out. Practice it a bit. If you can camp, you can hike, do so. If you can include your loved ones, do so. What works, what doesn't work? Is it actually worth hiking a big BioLite stove with you when it's 18 degrees centigrade or 26 degrees centigrade outside? Probably not. If it's minus 30 centigrade, I would argue hiking a BioLite stove with me is an absolute essential. It will depend on the time of year, it will depend on the environment, and it will always depend on what you and yours can physically and mentally do. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Stay tuned. Chapter 3 will be coming up. And what is in Chapter 3? I have no clue. Let's find out. Identifying hazards and responses. Absolutely critical. If you don't know it's a hazard, it could hurt you. If you don't know what to do if it happens, it could hurt you. So this should be an interesting one. The disaster they're going to cover in this one is, not sure from the book, but I think they're going to talk about a really, really massive tornado strike in the United States of America. What it does have, and it's kind of an interesting thing, it does have a format. You can get these online and you can make these yourselves. This is a disaster planning list and this is what you do. And if you have special considerations, you might want to put them in here. Toodles. This has been a 2021 Wolfie on the Stairs production, waiting for his dinner.